But I was laying in the bed and they're like, you're going to die within the next 24 hours if you don't get this surgery. In that moment, these other beings came to me, and I can't really describe what happened in that space, but they were just like, you're going to be okay. It's okay to have the surgery. And I opened my eyes and I realized at that moment that everyone that was standing around me were earth angels. The letting go before a near-death experience is just like, it's a sense of peace.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, and welcome everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. We are in season 14 and we are back talking about all things near-death experiences. Our guest today is Linn Rivers, and Linn has had 3 near-death experiences, 2 when she was very young. She doesn't remember a lot of detail around those experiences, but there are things from those experiences which have stayed with her, which have set her up for her life going forward. And then she also had another experience later in life due to some medical things that were going on for her. She's had quite a medical journey. Linn is doing some amazing things about getting her stories out, about sharing stories of near-death experiences. I think our conversation today might cover quite a few topics. She has amazing insights, has a lot of connection to the other side, a lot of things that she sees going on. So I would say buckle up. We are going to have quite a conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what we talk about. So Linn Rivers, welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. It's great to have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Where does your story start? Where do we start with the beginning of your near-death experiences?
So it's interesting because I actually had a couple when I was 1 and 3. And so those are things that I don't remember, but hearing my parents talk about it, that's where I was first introduced to them, I should say. And I think those are kind of the most pivotal ones for me because of the fear that I ended up going through life with because of them. Because I was in incubators, I was tied down. They had to hold down my arms to put needles in. And I just had, I had things in down my nose, and my mom and dad, they were worried. So the love that came out was fear-based, right? It was like, don't die. We love you, and we don't realize how much we take on as children. That energy really set into me of their fear. And I grew up really afraid of love because I equated love to fear, right? So I wouldn't even say the words, I love you. Up until I was probably 20 years old is the first time I told a family member that I loved them, because I equated love to that fear that they had for me in the hospital, right? So that's a whole story on its own. But then when I was in my mid-20s, it's actually a really fun story. I was dying my organs were shutting down because I had a virus that attacked, and I was dealing with a lot of digestive issues, and it just kind of spiraled downhill. And my organs were shutting down at the same time that my partner was diagnosed with colon cancer. And
wow.
I was just like, oh man. So at that point, I had lost the majority of my family. So I had to take care of myself. And she had to go back to Oregon to live with her family so they could take care of her because I couldn't. And it was in that moment that I was like, I have to take care of myself, and be here. And it got really bad. And there was a point where, I don't know how in depth you want me to go to it right now, but there was a point where I was crawling across the floor, and it took me about 10 minutes to get maybe 15 feet to get water. And I got back to my bed, and my dogs were not allowed in my room at that point. But I got back to my bed, and I was like, I'm done. I was like, I'm ready. There's just this release that I had, and my dogs came into my room and laid right beside me. And they never did that because they weren't allowed to, but they just came and they stayed right there beside me. And all of a sudden this sense of peace, just this immense sense of peace. I cannot emphasize just how peaceful it is in that moment where you're letting go. And I was just like, I'm ready. And I let go. And I was just in this space of just I had a smile on my face. I was ready. There was nothing holding me back anymore, because before whenever I was really sick, I was like, man, like what would happen if I died? The only thing that I worried about were my dogs, right? Like I didn't have anything else to really worry about in my life, but my dogs is like, what if no one finds them? Who's going to take care of them? I'm by myself. And in that moment, none of that mattered. Like I was like, everything's going to be just fine. They'll be taken care of. Like I'll be able to contact someone on the other side to get them taken care of. And that is what happened in that moment. It was just like this letting go, and I let go. And the next thing that I remember is two spirit guides coming to me, and they were Native American, which was one of the most beautiful moments for me because I had always had a deep connection to the Native American culture and drums and everything. And I never understood why until that moment. They came to me and they said, you can't come here yet. And you have to go back. And this is what you need to do so you can heal. And they told me what I needed to do. And I was like, okay. And so they put me back in, and I all of a sudden I'm awake and I'm more able than I had been in months. Like for once I did not feel pain in my body. And I was like, okay, it's like, this is different. And I did exactly what they told me to do. They were very specific about, your partner said to do XYZ. You need to listen to this. She didn't tell you this just for fun. Like, this is what you need to do. And I did it. And that's where my healing journey from that one started. Like, it was just like okay, step by step, I got better and better. And it was great. And so then years pass and I'm still in that healing process. Like, I still hadn't quite like gotten back to a really healthy body. There are still things that I was dealing with. And my partner ended up passing away. And so that kind of brought me back down into like my body just kind of broke down even more at that point. And then I get called. I've always been really in touch with my guides, whatever you want to call it, other beings who are assisting me. And one day I was in Austin and they woke me up. My eyes like shot open and they said, you need to go back to New Mexico now. And I was just like, wow. And when those messages come through, they're so strong, and I listen to them, right? I'm like, okay, like I hear you, I'm going. And so I managed to rent out my apartment where I was staying for like not even a week later. I was back in New Mexico. And then a week later, I got a phone call and my dad died. And I hadn't talked to my dad in years, so I had no idea what was happening. But he was in New Mexico. So it was like necessary for me to be there because I was his heir at that point. And so he died. And then a week later, my appendix ruptured.
One thing after another. Oh my goodness.
So this one was one of those moments, though, where I did have the sense of doom. It went all the way from the sense of doom to, again, that peace, because they say like sometimes when something, like when you're about to die, you will have that sense of doom. If it's a momentarily like where it's not just like moment and then you're dead. It's like, oh no, like you're about to die if you don't get help. Right. And when my appendix ruptured, I did not know what happened, but I had the deepest sense of doom. I was like, oh my God, like what just happened? That was not okay. Even though it wasn't really painful at that point yet, I knew that something had just happened. And I pushed it. Like, I did not go to the hospital right away. I waited till the next day, till my friend made me go to the hospital because I couldn't walk. I couldn't stand up. I was dry heaving and vomiting everywhere. And she's like, you have to go. She's like, this isn't just some bug, like something's wrong. And so she took me to the hospital and the doctor's like, well, your appendix ruptured, so we need to have surgery immediately. They're like, you already have peritonitis. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll wait. Like, give me just a minute. Like, let me be here for a minute to see if this goes away. I don't know what my rationality was there, but I was laying in the bed and they're like, you're going to die within the next 24 hours if you don't get this surgery. And I'm still just like, okay, like, let me just sit through the pain and let me see. And sure enough, here comes that sense of peace again. And I'm like, actually, you know what? It's okay. I want to let go. Like, I just want to go. And in that moment, these other beings came to me, and I can't really describe what happened in that space, but they were just like, you're going to be okay. It's okay to have the surgery. I think that was my fear. I was afraid of being in the medical system again when I had been in it for so long as a child, and it just made me worse, right? Like everything the medical system did made me worse. So I had this like idea about, oh, well, if I do surgery, like what's going to happen? And in that moment, I was like, oh, I'm okay if I do, and I'm okay if I don't. Like I can let go now. And again, that sense of peace came to me, and I was just so happy and so ready. And then they wheeled me in. They're like, it's time, like we have to do this. I was like, okay, that's fine. And they're wheeling me in, and I'm going in and out. And I opened my eyes, and I realized at that moment that everyone that was standing around me were earth angels. They're called like earth angels because they were there to protect me in that moment. And they were all smiling at me. It wasn't a rush in fear. They're just sitting there smiling at me with these beautiful smiles, and they're just white, like these beautiful white beings. And they're like, everything's going to be just okay. You're going to be fine. And I don't remember anything from that point until waking up quite a while after. But that wasn't like the end of everything's going to be okay. I ended up having to be in the hospital for a week on a drainage tube, like everything backed up into my stomach. I had fecal matter in my gut that they had to drain. They had to stick a tube in my lower belly to get all of the peritonitis out. And I was walking around with that for a month after I finally was released from the hospital, but my doctor didn't want to let me out. And I remember going to a store, and someone saw me, and they looked at me like I was a walking dead person. They're like, are you okay? Like, you look like you're about to die. And I'm like, well, you're not half wrong, you know? But it took me months to like actually come back from that one. And I didn't really want to, you know. It was kind of, I think the funny thing is we fear death, but then when you're in that moment and you're in that sense of peace, like there is no greater feeling than that, like that release, that like no longer being attached to the external world, and realizing that it's just so much more than we could ever explain to people, you know, until they have that experience.
Have you ever experienced that kind of release, that kind of space where you are ready to completely let go any other time in your life? I guess it's a space of surrender.
Not to that extent. Like there is such a difference. Like I can reach that point quite often in my life of just letting go and feeling okay, but you're still attached to this physical world, right? Like you're still attached here and to everything that's around you. And with the experience of that, it's like a letting go of just like returning home is the best way that I can explain that. And I think it's interesting because they are each time that happened, they're very clear on not letting me see too much of the other side, because I've always been one foot out the door. I've always been more, connected to my ethereal realm than here on this planet. And so they've always been really careful to not show me too much. But before those events happened, I was in contact with them. They contacted me and they did a healing on me. And I said, am I going to have to come back? And they said, yes, you're going to have to come back. And they told me that both times, like beforehand. And so I knew, like in advance, I kind of knew what was happening. But each time I asked them, do I have to come back? And they said, yes, you do. And so it's almost like I've gotten glimpses enough to know that what's on the other side for me is so much better than this physical reality. Right. Yeah. And so I think the letting go, it's a returning to something more, my true essence, versus like when I let go here in the physical world, it's a release of just like, okay, I don't need to know the answers right now, and it'll come. Right. But the letting go before a near-death experience is just like, it's a sense of peace that I want to say I have reached, a few times in this life, but it's just not the same. I just don't think I could reach that form of letting go, because it's a different notion of what we're letting go to, right? It's like letting go to allow, and then letting go to release. It's like two very different. Yeah.
Quite final, isn't it? Oh gosh. How did it
Yeah.
make you feel when you knew you had to come back?
I wasn't really excited about it. I was just like, okay, like if I signed up for this, I signed up for this.
Yeah.
Because they showed me the state of the world, right? And the first time it was dark and it was brown and it looked dead. And they said, this is why you're here. And I said, okay, so does that mean I have to go back? And they're like, yes. And the second time it looked better. And I looked up at this being and I was like, does that mean I have to go back? And they said, yes, you have to go back. And I was like, okay, and so like, I don't fight it when I'm in that space. I don't fight it, but there is this sense of like, well, I don't have to go back, do I? Like, I'd prefer not to.
Mm.
um, but it was a last near-death experience for me that really, really brought me down to earth, and like literally spit,
Yeah.
that's a literal thing, where I put both feet on the ground and I said, I'm here and I'm going to be here and I'm going to utilize this time. Because I think I'm a being that they showed me where I don't have to come back next time if I don't want to, which is not, there's not a lot of us here who get that choice, but they're very clear, like, you don't have to come back next time, but utilize this life for whatever you came here for. And so this last time was like, got it, both feet are on the ground, like, let's be here.
Yeah, that's exciting. I don't know. I get quite excited about the other side. Not in a way that I'm going to finish my life or anything here, because I do believe that we're here for a reason.
Exactly.
But yeah, knowing that you're not going to come back again, I don't know. Is that a little bit weird?
I
Maybe.
love that. Oh God, I'm like, please, like, I feel like I've been on Earth so many times, and I'm just like, I feel a little bit bored in this world where I'm just like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's not that I can't enjoy myself, like I climb and I like traveling, but there's always just the sense of like, but it's not home. Like, it's not home to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So how have you found that you said at one point that you've kind of got one foot in this life and one out. How do you find that to be here after having the glimpse of what's out there and knowing that this is the last time that you're doing this?
I mean, it's like a mixed bag, right?
Yeah.
I want to enjoy this life, but the first 30 plus years of my life were so traumatic. Like, it was just constant turmoil. And all of my families died at this point. My partner who died, right? Like, it's just like, when my grandpa died, he was the last person in my family to die. And when he died, my mom came through, because I've always had I'm a, what do you call it? Prophetic dreamer. So I've always dreamed about things that happen before they happen. And I also have an easy access to my past loved ones. And my mom doesn't come through that often, but she did come through when my grandpa died. And she said, he's here, but he needs to rest. He'll be in contact soon. And that's all she told me. And I was just like, oh my God, like, she's with my grandpa. They were so close. They're very connected. And I was just like, man, like, there's a bit of envy there, right? Like, they're all getting to, and I was just like, oh, like, okay. But I feel like I'm ready to jump into what I came here to do. I'm a storyteller, right? I tell stories through audio and through video. I make videos about all of this, and I'm making a documentary about this actually right now.
Oh, cool.
And so I feel like really good about being here, but I'm also not attached to being here. And I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people fear death. And I'm not attached to being here. And so I think I live my life in a very different way. I don't fear everything that's happening in society. I don't pay attention to what's happening in society. I live in my own truth and walk my own path. And I think that gives me it's okay that I'm here. I'm here for a reason. Like you said earlier, like, I know that I'm here for a reason. So it doesn't trigger me. I can now have one foot out the door and still connect to the ethereal realm and still know that my journey right now is here on earth. And so I don't feel like it's man, I hate being here. By no means, it's not like that. I don't, hate anything per se. I think it's just part of the journey. And I love having one foot out the door, because it's just like that reminder of my true essence and where I've come from and where I'm going,
I really like that. I'm kind of reminded of when you probably back more than we do everything online now, but back when you had to buy a ticket and you had the physical ticket and you knew you're going somewhere, but you haven't left yet and you haven't packed your bag yet, but you know that you're going to go on this adventure. I'm kind of
Yes.
reminded like that. And I get a really beautiful sense of freedom that's coming through as you're talking. I'm like, yeah, this just feels really nice, feels light, rather than being stuck into the heaviness of this world, which we
Yes,
all do from time to time. And this is a very heavy space to be in.
it is.
But yeah, I get this beautiful sense of freedom coming through. So yeah, I get quite excited just listening to you talk about it. It sounds amazing, and I look forward to it as well. I'd like to backtrack. You've talked about quite a few things. You've talked about your connection and how you sense your guides and your
Mhm.
spiritual team. Do you think that all comes from having two near-death experiences very early on? Like, have you got any memory of what happened in those experiences?
No, none. And I find that interesting that you asked that because I always wondered, why was I such a prophetic child? I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, my dreams were very prophetic. And I remember dreams from when I was like 4 years old. Like I was that powerful of a dreamer to where I was having like active lucid dreams at the age of 4.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow. And I mean, I've been psychic as far as like intuitive, and I can pick up on things that are happening to people in front of me very easily, to where they're like, how did you know that's happening? Like, nobody knows. And I'm like,
Yeah.
don't know. But that's been since I was a child too. And it was always like, is that why I had those experiences as a child? Because I was supposed to bring in these gifts, and that could not have happened without those experiences, right? Because I think that our hardest experiences in life are what make us who we are in this world.
Oh,
And
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, and so like there's nothing that like all of my family members dying, I'm happy for them. Like as an ego left behind, it's hard for us being left behind. But because I know, I'm like, oh, but they're great. Like I'm happy for them. And so I think there's like this, I don't know. I think I had to learn to be this person through those experiences. So I do think that a lot of this came from that. I think that I had to go through those,
Mm.
and I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, I guess it's hard to know because you were so young and it's pretty hard to remember life beforehand. A lot
Right.
of experiences we talk about how when we come back, we do come back with, you can call them gifts. They're not always pleasant gifts. They can be quite confusing, but we come back with gifts or abilities or different ways of seeing the world. So
Hmm.
it would be very hard to know whether they came through your experiences or whether actually you were born with them,
Right.
how that all kind of works. What was that like growing up? What was that like? Did you share with your parents that you were having lucid dreaming at 4, that you were connecting with different things? And did you talk about it?
No, no, I didn't. I mean, I didn't even think to talk to them about that stuff. It was what it was, right? And I grew up in a pretty rocky family, as far as there's a lot of illness in my family, and my dad was an alcoholic and all of these things. So I was just a really traumatized child. And so I was just constantly living in fear. And I told you about the love thing where I was terrified of the word love.
Yeah, so
And
hard.
my grandma was my favorite person in the world.
Yeah.
And I watched her go through so much with breast cancer. And I remember just like watching her fall and not being able to do anything about it as a kid, and not knowing, like, am I going to be okay? And all of these things. And the night that she died, I wrote her a little letter, and I
Mm.
was in the hospital room with her, and I wrote, I love you at the end. And I read it. And literally, like 4 seconds after I read it, she took her last breath. And so, as an 8-year-old, we have a very narcissistic mind. And we think that everything revolves around what we say or
Yeah,
do. Right.
yeah.
And so, it's like, it's a psychological thing. And so, I thought I killed her because I used the word love, which I
Oh,
had refused to do, that up until that point. And so I thought I killed her because I told her I loved her. So that really solidified, never tell anyone that you love them. so,
oh my goodness.
so, but when I was able to look back at it, I realized that the experiences that I had as a child fed such a strong fear, and I wasn't able to talk to anyone about it. And I do remember though that my mom, she had an active psychic channel too, but she never really she had pendulums and she worked with crystals, but it wasn't like a flaunting thing. It was just kind of like she used it every once in a while. And so I had that in my life, but she died when I was 14. So before I could ever really experience what I was feeling, I never got to talk to her about that stuff. So I have no idea if other people in my family had any of those gifts or, I don't know.
And quite hard to go and have a everyday conversation with them now, I suppose, because you're saying that you've got no family left. Is that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Gosh, that's a lot to go through. That's a lot of loss, a lot of change. I'm really still just processing what you've shared about the love piece and hearing that story about your grandmother, that you thought you'd killed her by telling her that you loved her.
Yeah.
I mean, that's heartbreaking stuff. That is so tough. We hear a lot in experiences how, we say the meaning of life is love, that it's all about love. It all comes back to love. And these are the stories that we hear over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Having two near-death experiences as a really little person, as a child or very young, and then not feeling the capacity to be able to love and feeling like love is maybe a hurtful thing.
Yeah.
I guess I'm sort of processing this as I'm talking to you, just how it doesn't automatically come that if you have a near-death experience or a significant spiritual experience, that we understand that it's all about love, that we understand that love flows freely. And it's not always that simple, because we do come back. I know when I had my experience, I came back and I had a lot of, I still go through self-love things, and it doesn't necessarily come naturally, even though we've had these experiences. So how did that play out later in your life? You said you probably didn't tell anybody that you loved them or were able to say those words till you were about 20 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and you're right. It's a lot for a child. I mean, if I really look at it, I could say that there are more near-death experiences as a child, because I had really bad asthma, and there were a couple times that my inhaler was out and we had to rush to the emergency room, and I know people who have died within 5 minutes of not having their inhaler, trying to reach for their inhaler, and they've died, and so it's who's to say how many have actually had because that was quite a regular thing. I was in the hospital for asthma growing up. And so that was a whole side piece, right? But the love piece, I remember, I think it was my grandpa who, he ended up really sick and in the hospital. And there was a moment where it's I don't know if I'm going to get to tell him this again. And I remember it was so hard for me to get the words out, but I did. It was the first time that I said, I love you, and I said, I love you to partners as I was going through late teens, early 20s and stuff. But I was able to say it because I didn't really mean it. If we're being honest, I was just in relationships to be in relationships at that age. Most of us we're just trying to figure ourselves out through other people. So it didn't really resonate. I was just sure, I can say I love you. It doesn't mean anything on that level. But when it came to people that I did love, it was just man, it felt like there was just this heaviness in my chest. And I remember telling my grandpa, I love you. And just having this feeling of just oh my God, what if I just killed him because I said that, even though at that point I didn't believe it, it was still a PTSD from when I was 8 years old that made me believe that it was possible. But it was after that I really started working through it and making sure that I told him all the time, because it's I don't know if I'm going to see him again. If he leaves, this might be my last time to tell him in this physical world that I love him. And so that really shifted my views around it and really made it okay for me to understand that. I mean, it was a whole process of coming to that, of just realizing words are just words. Use them with, consciousness. And if I love someone, say it, because we don't know, when the next time we'll be able to is. And if I mean it, then that's even more reason to speak it. And so it was really finding myself more throughout the next, 10 plus years of just understanding that, I think maybe it was a later near death experience at that point that I was like, oh, I love everyone, right? Like there's no one in this life that I would turn an eye to. It doesn't matter what they've done in this world. And that kind of love eventually did seep into my body, where it's just like, it's easy to love people. It's not easy to like them, but it's easy to love them out of compassion, out of genuine just humanness.
Oh gosh, you're so right though. We never know what's around the corner. We never know when the last opportunity we can tell somebody is.
Right.
I find a lot of my work, I'm doing the podcast, a lot of my work, I'm working as an end of life doula with people who are right at the end of life. There's a lot around death. There's a lot around loss. I also lost my father in an accident. And so I'm very, very aware of how fickle life can be. And I say fickle in the way that it can just change in an instant. We just never know from day to day. And as you're talking, I'm reminded again and again, anything can happen. And we need to tell the people that we love them. And we need to understand things aren't permanent. Are you a little bit like me, where I'm aware of this day in, day out? I always want to tell the people I love them, but it's quite hard to not get focused around the fact that the loss is coming up at some point. We don't know when. To focus in on, we're going to lose things. We're going to get hurt. Life is going to be tough. Death is real.
So yes, there's like a big point of that for me. So like a lot of the PTSD that I grew up with as a child, I go through life with that every day. I'm always aware of like, oh, this car could merge over and, kill all of these.
Yeah.
Like, just like everything that you do, I realize like life is literally like this fine line, and it's like 1 second and it can be done, right?
Yeah.
And so like I always walk around with that, but then I've kind of really accepted humans dying. Like I see the bigger purpose. And the one thing I came back with after this last one was before COVID, and I got to see what COVID actually was. So I was like, I'm not afraid of this thing. I don't know what, like I'm seeing all the fear in people and what it's causing. And I understood it from a much bigger perspective that they showed me. So people, I'm like, we're all going to die. It doesn't matter. But my dog, it is so hard for me to not think about losing my dog. And my dog has been the most unconditional love that I've ever known. It's like, I don't think that we'll ever really find that form of love in humans, as far as like that acceptance and that forgiveness and that, that just, it's a pure being, right? And my dog and I, we were more than just, she's not just a dog, she's a soul contract for me. And each time that I've almost died, she smelled like death. Like she was taking on, and before I got pancreatitis, she got pancreatitis. Like it's always been this really bizarre thing. But when I was in the hospital and I was like in that like week of death, my friend who was taking care of her, she's like, I can't touch her. She smells so much like just like rotten flesh right now. And I was just like, so this dog is like a deep connection to me. And it is one of the only things that'll bring me to tears, is thinking about not being with her.
Yeah. It's hard to know that sometimes something's going to happen to one of us, whether it's us or the people that we love.
Right.
And not to get focused on that. And you're talking about how it's such a fine line. The car could, I think all day, oh, that could be an end, that could be an end, that could be an end.
Right.
And to not live in a negative space, to still go, but it's okay to fully live. So I think when we consider death, we can consider life as well. And it's a very kind of bipolar thing. It's very black and white. So
it's hand in hand.
Interesting. It really is. It really is.
The other.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Are you happy to share a little bit around the COVID thing?
So basically what they showed me is every 100 years, they have to send something in, and every thought that a human has, regardless of we consider it good or bad, it is part of our human evolution. And so every 100 years, if you pay attention to history, something comes in to do a sweeping of energy. Humans are just an energetic exchange. We're literally an energetic being, and we need to clean up the earth, right? Like it has to be cleaned up. We cannot keep reproducing the way that we are and expect earth to sustain us. So every 100 years or so, they come in and they do a big sweep up and they say, we've got to clear this energy out, and so from the bigger perspective, it is an energetic clearing. We're clearing out the old stagnant energy that is not serving us. And before that happened, I knew that even my grandpa was going to die through this process because he had done everything that he came here to do. And he was part of the old energy that was just like weighing it down. He had a lot of old beliefs that just weren't serving the energetic exchange that we're moving towards at this point. We're stepping into a higher vibration, and a vibration energy, it's all the same thing. You can use whatever words you want to. But I knew in that moment, I was like, my grandpa's going to be one who's going to have to leave. And sure enough, he did. He actually died a week after getting the vaccine. So it was just kind of like, all of it is just part of the process. And it doesn't matter if people are pro-vaccine or not, it's all of the same. It's all part of the same bigger picture. It's a mass exit for people so Earth can continue to grow in a positive direction. And when I saw that, I was just like, great. And they told me like, this is what people are going to be experiencing. I experienced COVID before anyone actually knew about it. It was like a week before they announced it to the world. And they said, this is what people are going to be experiencing. And they're like, it's going to be okay. It's just another virus. It's, basically like along the lines of the flu, it doesn't matter what you call it. For everyone who was immune compromised, it would affect them. If they weren't, they weren't, but they couldn't bring in that fear factor, right? And so it's just like, great. So I was like, so don't be afraid. They're like, no. So that whole time throughout the entire thing, I lived my life and, just assisted people who were freaking out and, living in like the deep fear of it. And so that was like my main thing through that whole part of it, was just to assist people in not being afraid of what was happening.
Wow. It's so interesting how you talk about the clearing of energy and how, I can't remember your exact words, how people are actually choosing to go, or that the massive exit.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm hearing this more and more and more, and I'm reading about it. And I actually did another podcast interview that will be released a little bit later. I did that yesterday, and we were talking about that, about the mass energy clearing with people dying. So we're looking at that. We've just seen the huge earthquake that's going on. And oh my goodness, I was looking at the footage of that and my heart was just breaking for all these families, the devastation. So that's another example. We've just had flooding here in Auckland, not a massive loss of life, but a loss of identity, a loss of belongings, a loss of, being able to live in your house, and all these things are going on. We're seeing earthquakes and storms and floods and pandemics, all these things. So I do agree that there are big clearing events that are happening. And you mentioned every 100 years. I suspect it's probably getting a little bit faster, that we're seeing all sorts of things just sort of pop up for this clearing to take place.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around the people that leave in these moments, the ones that die? Do you think that's a choice? Do you think they have any kind of ability to choose, I'll be one of the ones that leaves this earth now?
They do. Oh yeah, they do. Even if it's last minute, it is a choice, regardless of if we are conscious of it on this planet. We are always in conversations with the other side. A lot of people just don't realize it. But there are two things that happened in my life that really like solidified that for me. And my partner, when she was dying at the same time that I was, the veil was so thin for both of us that we were actually able to communicate telepathically. We were long distance. She was in Oregon, I was in New Mexico, and we were actually able to communicate about what was happening with each other. And we met at this wall, which was the most beautiful thing, because there was a wall that was separating us. Right. And it was like we were on this other side and we were talking. And she asked me, she said, are we going to be able to continue with each other if we stay here? And for whatever reason, my soul said no. Like it wasn't a long-term contract. And so I said no. And she said, then I'm going to go. And she chose in that moment that she was going to leave this world. And she ended up dying, I think, like a month later after we had that conversation. And then I was still in contact with other people in her life at that point. So everything that we were talking about was confirmed. Like, this is when she decided she was just ready to let go. And that was a moment for me where I was like, oh, she got to choose. Like, she could have stayed here if she wanted to, but she just didn't feel like there was enough here for her. She was kind of like me, and like, Earth is really kind of boring, you know? And so there wasn't just a lot that she wanted to stay here for. And so she chose in that moment to go. And there was another incident where, let me see if I can remember this woman. I'm trying to remember how it actually went, but she actively knew that she had the choice to stay here or to leave. And it was in that moment where it was like kind of like this sweeping, like, I'm going to stay. She decided to stay here, but she realized that she was given this chance to, like, you don't have to be here anymore. But if you do, you can continue to do this project, like this big thing that she was working on. And she chose to stay. And it was in that moment where it was like, you're either going to die. It was kind of like mine, like, you either die or you get to choose to stay. And they're kind of a little bit more adamant about me staying here, but it was a choice for her. And I've seen that over and over again, where people get to decide to leave or stay, and it's never a feeling of fear. When they decide that they're going to go, this is where that story was going. This is just her story. When they decide that they're going to go, they no longer live in a sense of fear of dying. That's when they're like, it's okay. Like, I'm going to leave and I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. That fear of death is no longer there. And they decide to go or stay in that moment, right? This woman, when she decided to stay, she no longer had that fear of death. And she's like, oh, wow, like, I do get to choose or stay, and I'm happy either way. But it was more profound in the sense of, I want to make sure I tell this with respect. Because it's like, I don't want to, like, diminish what happened with her. The best way that I can describe it is, it's a release of fear and knowing that everything's going to be okay. And that if she were to let go, she would be just as happy, right? Like, it's that what you and I were talking about at the beginning, that she doesn't want to just, like, commit suicide or leave life, that she knows that she would be okay if she did leave. But she did it with intention, because she knew that if she left in the way that she was intending to, I'm trying not to get too, like, personal of her story, but if she chose to leave in the way that she intended to, she would have to come back.
So you're talking in terms of, like, life plan, soul plan, that if she completed the full life, she would have to come back to complete that life?
No, in a sense of, if she had committed suicide.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more intense. It's like, it's a feeling of, she got to choose to stay. And I think a lot of people, when they try to commit suicide and they fail, they still come back with that same understanding of, like, oh, it's okay if I would have died, but I'm happy to stay now. Right. So it's like, it's that choice. They were given a choice and they chose to stay, because in that moment of their death, they were given that opportunity. They were told, you can, but then you'll have to come back, right? Like, if you leave this life early, you'll have to come back. But if you stay and actually live out your life as you intended, you might not have to, right? Like, it was a choice for her.
Right. Yep. Okay. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a little complex. I was trying to, like, respect not giving too much information.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I find the whole concept super interesting. We talked about exit points previously on the show, about how we've got our life, we've got our soul plan, we've got all the things we need to do. And if we look at it on like a linear scale, which you can't really do because life isn't linear, but if you go, I'll be born here and I'll go through all these things and then I die at this point here, along the way, there's potential openings, which are exit points where we may choose to leave. And I'm thinking about this great energy cleansing that you've been talking about and how they may be an exit point in our life plan for us, but we don't necessarily know it's coming. We don't know when it's going to happen. Subconsciously, we could be choosing the exit point, which is the little everyday things. Like, I'm a big believer that the tiniest things in life are actually the things that make the biggest difference. So deciding whether we get in the car at a certain time, whether we go to this place, which would put us in this apartment building when an earthquake hits, which then falls to the ground, which is all part of the exit. It's subconsciously choosing to take that exit to be part of the big energy cleanse. Or it's saying, you know what, I feel like I'm just going to stay in this other place today, and not being like that, not being part of that whole thing. All these subconscious decisions that take place. Do you feel like you're aware of all of these subconscious things during the day as you're just going about life?
Yes. And if you'll remind me, I want to bring this back to Astral City. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's kind of along the lines of like, okay, we can be conscious of, I'm hyper conscious, like people talk about like trying to be self-aware, and my journey has made me extremely self-aware to sometimes it's a fault, right? Because I'm aware of every single thought I'm having, how it affects my life. What if I do this point? Like if I do this trajectory, where will it, it's a hyperactive self-awareness. But I think what I wanted to say there is we can be aware of all of that stuff, but still not know what's happening behind the scenes, right? Like, so there's really no point in being that hyper aware of all of everything that we're doing, which is why I do always try to bring myself back to a center. I don't need to be thinking about everything. I don't need to overanalyze everything that's happening. Come back to center. Every time I'm overanalyzing something, I'm like, okay, come back, look around my room, look at the pictures, be present, right? And then there's the point of, yes, the earthquakes happen. Yes, did we choose to be in that? Was it a momentarily decision? Yes, like all of these different things. And you were talking about like the journey of like, okay, we're born here, we go through all of this, and then we die. And then that begs to ask, well, where does free will come in? And my biggest battle was always free will versus destiny. What do we actually have control over? And I realized through one of the experiences that we actually have more free will than we will ever know, right? And there may be certain things in life that we experience for a higher purpose, but we don't have to experience certain things if we are learning what we actually came here to learn, right? So a lot of times it'll take the universe smacking you up beside the head until you get a lesson, right? And my thing has been teaching people, don't wait for that slap. If you're being nudged to learn something, do your best to understand it, because we are this. I'm going to wrap it into this movie here in just a second. We are creating our reality by every moment, right? So what we choose to do in this moment is a prediction of what is to come in our future later. If we're not fixing what we're supposed to be working on, we're just going to get more of that later. And we like to say, oh, well, I'm just destined to like live in this fear and this poverty and all of these things. And we try to make excuses, but because we're not moving out of it, yes, that's what keeps coming for us, right? Until we actually understand what's coming. And so I like to look at it as like, if I'm creating XYZ, I think about the present moment. It's present based off of our past actions.
Oh,
and
cool.
I was living in fear and turmoil the most of my life. And until I started getting over that fear, did my future start changing. Okay, so that's where I realized like, wow, we actually do have free will. And in one of the moments of my near-death experiences, I realized they told me, if you drink if you treat your body with disrespect, if you use drugs, if you're intentionally killing yourself, okay? Because when alcoholics, anything, addicts of any sort, they are intentionally hurting themselves. And that is considered suicide because we are actively partaking in hurting our body, which is our vessel through this life. And so they consider that a form of suicide. And it was not until after that happened for me that I saw Astral City. And Astral City is a channel. I don't know if you've ever heard of Chico Xavier. He was one of the first well-known psychics. And he looked like an alien. It looked like it was almost like they did not know how to put him in this world without him looking like an alien. He had to wear glasses because his eyes were just so bizarre and people could not like stop looking at him. Anyway, he channeled a being from the same planet that I'm from. Okay. Like where I originated from, he channeled a being. And this experience was almost identical to what I had and to what my dad had. And in this movie, they go through the entire channel of what he got from this being. And one of the guys, the main character, he was out drinking every night. He had a lot of liver problems and he ended up dying. And he was in this midway point of having to like go through exactly what he did. Like, well, why am I here? Like, why can't I just go back home? And they're like, you have to work through what you did. You committed suicide. He's like, no, I didn't. And they reflashed everything of him going out every night and drinking and getting drunk and eating unhealthy. And they're like, you did not take care of yourself and you could have chose to. And it was in that moment where I was like, that's what I saw. That is what I saw. I get to choose to take care of myself and live a happy, healthy life. Or I can keep doing what I was doing and they'll pull me out. If we do not have if we're not taking care of ourselves and we're given chance after chance to come back to our true essence and being here and healthy and being on our path, there's no reason for us to be here if we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And that was like the reality of like, oh my God, we do have free will. We get to choose to live our life in accordance with our divine, integrity, or we will get pulled out if we're not waking up to what we need to wake up to.
That is so interesting. I totally agree with, it's almost like cause and effect. What we're creating today is what we have in the future. So we may as well create really well today. And it can be overwhelming. It can be scary. It can be hard. But I always think I don't necessarily need to live a nice long life. I don't need to keep going for ages. And
Right.
I talk about that quite a bit in just random conversations with my friend or family. I'm like, yeah, I don't need to stick around long. But if I do, I want to be able to use my body well. I want to be healthy. I don't want to be in my older years and struggling and maybe stuck at home because I don't have my physical mobility or I don't have my emotional mobility, all these things. So for me, I'm quite motivated by, I'm not doing it because I need to live a long, healthy life. But if I am going to be here, I want to have the best experience. I want to actually have a decent quality of life. So I'm quite motivated by that. And I definitely think everything we do today, like the pre-scent, that was really cool for me. I haven't heard that before. Really cool, because it's almost like the moment that we're in is the pre-scent moments from our past. So I get that. It's really cool. And we don't have to tackle everything. We don't have to live a perfect life. And as you're speaking, I was going, well, actually, it might not just be the food and the alcohol and, all the habits which maybe aren't so healthy. Maybe it's living a life that's too rigid or too healthy, or having boundaries in place where we can't give ourselves a break. Maybe that's some of the stuff we need to look at. That the prolonged journey to what you call suicide isn't necessarily the harmful issues in terms of negative. It might be things that are really positive in life in small doses. So your motivation and you get up and go and looking after yourself. I'm going off track because I had a lot of thoughts around that. But how much our current moments are present from our past, that really makes sense to me. So motivated to get up and live really well, but also be in check because, like I said, I struggle with the self-love piece and I try and do too much and I try and be everything to everyone. And that's probably just as bad. I think that's probably the revelation that I'm just having.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me like clarifying the difference on that, those are patterns to work through, right? Those are things that we can do on like a conscious level of the emotional stuff, but the physical body, the reason like the drinking and the smoking and the drugs and everything of that is you are the way that they showed it is you're abusing a gift that you were given, right? Because our body is what's supposed to, and that can look so many different ways. Like the people who go to the gym too much and who work themselves like over what they should be, that is also abuse to the body. So I meant that in like the physical form, it was a gift to us. And that's why it was linked as to like, you're not taking care of your vessel that you're supposed to be in. But yet you're spot on that, like people who go to the gym and overwork their body and who tax it and think that they're like doing it good, but they're actually still, it's an abuse. Learning that balance of what your body actually needs, like that's where they showed like, as long as you're aware of that, like that was like the reality is like people do it blindly. They just think that, oh, I can do whatever I want. My body, my body's just a body, but it's actually, it was a gift for us to experience this life in.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think as experiences, near-death experiences, we're possibly a little bit more aware of our body. I'm not quite sure about that. Maybe. But
I was.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm like, I want to have mobility. I don't want to be constrained. I want to have the most out of my body. So for me, that is a lot of gym work. It's being active, it's having fun, it's enjoying the mobility. But, at the same time, I don't see an issue with having a glass of wine. It's not about being all or nothing. I don't think things are good or bad, right or wrong. I think it's about what is right for us personally and finding that balance. So I just want to throw that in there in case our listeners are listening and going, well, does that mean I can't have anything or do I have to completely uphold my life? Right. I don't think so. Just being aware. And I talk a lot about taking the time just to sit and connect. And, I did that last week and I was like, what does my body need right now? And it was more water. I just needed to drink some more water because I'd had a busy day rushing around. And here I was looking for some big spiritual thing. And actually it was make a dentist appointment and drink some water. So I was like, okay, that's what I need right now. And so it can be little things.
Right.
Yeah.
And but that's like the big point, right? Is just being aware of your body. Because I think the alcohol point is a bigger thing for me just because I was in the holistic health field for almost 20 years. Yeah. And knowing that even an ounce of alcohol shifts your microbiome by 60% within that week. So for me, it was more of just like seeing a much bigger picture, but it's, if you listen to your body and you have a glass of wine and you feel okay afterwards, great. But not everyone is going to feel okay afterwards. And I think it's that awareness of knowing when something is too much or, when you shouldn't be doing something. Some of us can't have even, like a drop of it because it'll set our bodies off. And those are people who are aware of that though. And that's what you want, that awareness that like you were saying, like, what do I need? Like, water. Okay, great. Do I feel good afterwards? Yes. Okay, perfect. And just that awareness that you have a body. You are not your body, but you have one. And to listen to it because it's a tool for you that's telling you, hey, this is great, or hey, no, please don't do this again. And it's that point of if your body is saying, please don't do this, listen to it. And if you feel good after things, listen to that too, So it's that awareness that really brings it all down to that point.
And for me, this is spiritual life. I love how every day these things are. But for me, this is so, so important. And we're so focused at times. I'm trying to be these spiritual beings. We are physical. We're here in a physical body. I love just bringing it back to everyday stuff. I need a dentist appointment.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's real life. So in terms of coming back, you felt like you didn't have a choice. You had to come back. Here we are again. You said you came back knowing that you had to do some things. Are you happy to share a little bit around what those things were and how that sort of played out?
I think there is a bigger thing for me to be in public more. And I've spent the last 7 years in a lot of solitude, just like really healing and finding myself and being alone. And I got really comfortable being alone. And speaking of that balance, right? Like I'm learning to put myself back in public again. And that's why I'm doing a lot of podcasts lately and doing my videos. And I feel that my work is to allow myself to share at this point, to integrate my stories and my videos and everything with the public, with the world, because I spent so long on the other side of it, and now it's time to like come out and do that. I think we talk a lot about purpose and, oh, well, what's your purpose in life? And our purpose is to be here. Our purpose is to be human, and as far as what I want to do, there's so many different paths I could have gone down, but it all comes down to what and how do I want to share what I want to share. We don't have to do a specific thing. And I think that can get really toxic, is the spiritual talk of like, oh, well, what's your life purpose and how to find it and all of these things. And it's like, we don't have a purpose, as far as what we're supposed to be doing. It's finding what you love to do and what makes you happy, because when you're happy, you emanate that energy, and that energy that you emanate from that space is the most healing thing that we can do from the world. You can be a doctor and helping people in all these different ways, but if you're not happy and actually loving what you're doing, it's not going to, emit that same energy. And so it's about finding what you actually love to do and doing it without restraint.
Oh, wow. I love that. That's so cool. I don't think it always comes easily as well. Like you're talking about the happiness factor, finding things we love. Often we have to transition out of something that we don't love, which can be very hard. And we need like the writing in the sky. This is your life purpose. Go and do this. And we're sitting here saying, okay, give me the big flashing lights to go and follow this.
Right.
But actually it's the small callings on our soul, on our everyday life, and go and find things that are happy. It sounds so easy, doesn't it? And yet that can be a really hard.
That's the journey.
Yeah, that is the journey.
Like that is the journey of like finding what makes you happy, and that's going to change. Like it's never going to be this consistent. That happiness level is going to shift, and it's the micro shifts in our lives that really create the most change and take us to those places.
Yeah.
It took me up until very recently to realize I don't want to be in the holistic health field anymore. And it took me 2 clients where it's just like hoping that they would cancel. It's like, please cancel, because I don't want to do this anymore. And that was my moment of clarity of like, it's time to move on and do what is making me happy now. It's not that didn't make me happy in the past, but it's no longer making me happy. And so now it's time to shift out of that. Yeah. Right. And so it's just like, it's never going to be a continuum. It's always going to be a ebb and flow, just as life. There's ups and downs. And it's going to be this like, oh, okay, I'm going to find this. And not to get down on yourself. If it's like, oh, well, I did this for 3 months and now I want to change already. It's like, that's fine. That was part of your process of getting to the next thing. It's, it's not going to be this bright light that says, oh, this is what you're going to do the rest of your life. And it's I think we put a lot of pressure on people to find that.
Yeah. And it's almost seen as a negative thing to change or to have different experiences. I'm a little bit, sorry, just losing my voice here. I'm a little bit different in the way that I want to go and I want to experience as many things as I can in a positive way. It's not going and trying things that are going to make my life hard, or, some of the things that we were talking about earlier about are slowly going to kill us.
Right.
I want to have experiences and try things, and I'm all over the place. Like we know that I have 5 jobs at the moment, and that's okay. I love it. I love the variety. I love trying new things. I love meeting different people. And I think that's okay. But again, it's coming back to what is our essence? What do we actually feel we want to do? Where is the fun? How do we enjoy this life? How do we get the most out of this life? And be in these bodies the best that we can be whilst we are in them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then jump ship with excitement.
Yeah, I love that. And it's hard not to look forward to that. But, it's cool. Yeah.
Jump with excitement when you die instead of living with regret, right? Like if you're not happy right now, find your way out of it, because, like, why end your life in that form?
Oh man, so much of this is really strongly resonating with me. So many people are dead before they die. They're walking around dead on the inside. And, I
Yeah.
just want to shake the world sometimes and go, wake up, let's just have some
Yeah.
fun. Let's enjoy life. Oh,
Yep.
on that note,
Agreed. I know.
Linn Rivers, thank you so, so much. I have found today's conversation so incredibly interesting. We have
Yes.
been all over the place. It's been
I know.
amazing. Thank you for sharing your experiences, sharing what you've learned from them. Oh, my heart is full. So, Linn, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk with you.